I've booked 6 speaking opportunities. It is March. 6 speaking opportunities for 2024 without pitching a single one.
Why do we need public relations?
Speaking authoritatively on a topic is the #1 way to start getting booked for speaking gigs.
How do we get on TV?
Your local news station is your biggest opportunity. We think about what has mass appeal. What could appeal to a 60-year-old that's watching the news, to the 40-year-old?
Here's a silly question I'm also trying to figure out in my head how to ask without offending you in any way.
This is going to keep me up at night.
I was thinking about the first message that I sent you. I was going to ask you if you want to critique that live.
It was great. I read it before we started recording.
I did use ChatGPT for help, to make sure my English and everything was proper.
That's okay. You know what? It didn't scream ChatGPT to me. You didn't use the word unlock or unleash. That's usually a dead giveaway for me.
Using the paid version.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
If you really want that guest and they don't respond, would you follow up?
I heard really bad advice on another podcast a couple days ago where someone said they suggest following up 5 times. Don't follow up 5 times.
When I send my second email to Seth Godin, what would be my subject line?
I would probably look at some of his more recent content and see if you can get that to play in. So maybe he just went on an amazing vacation. Maybe you reference that in the subject line, hey, now that you're back from vacation, do you have time for a podcast?
Well, the joke's on us that Corinne doesn't take vacations. Here's a secret that I'll share with you. There's one technique that multiple PR firms are using. And every time they have used this technique, I was forced to say yes to them, even though I didn't want to.
Wow. Okay, tell me.
So here it is.
In today's episode, we're talking to Katrina, a public relations expert who helps personal brands amplify their stories.
We'll delve into how to get on TV, even if you have no social media following.
Stick till the end to learn how you can use the Seth Godin strategy to connect with your dream celebrity. Why do we need public relations?
That's a good question. Well, it's so funny. A lot of business owners actually have this misconception that they don't need public relations, that it's just for, celebrities or big businesses. But PR is actually one of the easiest tactics to use in your day-to-day business operations. And I would argue it's one of the most effective. And we think that PR is, your standard image of a publicist on a red carpet, but PR is going to networking events. It's talking to, the neighboring storefront and thinking about how you could partner on a local event. It's connecting with others in your community that might have an audience that can benefit from your message. So public relations really is so many things, but we get stuck on this media relations image, which is one really, really small aspect when it really bleeds into so many different areas of our organic and natural business operations.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of different directions we can go down on, but I'm trying to think, for personal branding, are we talking about, you mentioned networking events, but are we also talking about social media, publishing on Facebook and stuff like that?
Yeah. So when I work with personal brands, your owned media, so that's your social media, your website, your email marketing, whatever assets you own and create content on are really the foundation of your public relations efforts. If you don't have that kind of owned media channel established, it's going to be really hard to convince someone to allow you to speak to their audience on their podcast or, interview for an article because you haven't built up a reason for them to share your story. So I actually face this a lot with a lot of businesses who want to use public relations instead of social media. And it's actually not an either or situation. Your social media is the core of your personal brand, and PR can really give you that lift off. But I kind of use this as a bit of a tagline, but you can't expect anybody else to tell your story if you aren't taking the initiative to tell it first, because why should anybody else care about it?
So if I wanted to get on stage?
Yeah.
That's
What would I
exactly
be
what I
Love
was
doing?
it.
thinking.
Love
How
where
do
it's
we get on the
going.
stage? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I am talking so much about this right now because it has become like a speaking engagement has kind of become the number one thing that personal brands want. And there's actually a way. So I've just talked a lot about this on my own social media account, but it's March 2024. And back in December, I had 0 speaking gigs booked for the year. My calendar was blank, but I was redoing my brand. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a speaking page on my website. Spoke at a couple of events last year, and I was really hoping I would book some for this year. And I didn't let the fear of not actually having anything booked stop me from positioning myself as a speaker. So the number one thing, if you want to start speaking on stage, you got to start positioning yourself as a speaker. So putting that page on your website and then showing up on social media and speaking authoritatively on a topic is the number one way to start getting booked for speaking gigs. I've booked 6 speaking opportunities. It is March, 6 speaking opportunities for 2024 without pitching a single one. So those are all opportunities that came directly to me because I have made a very, very conscious effort to position myself as a speaker on a very specific subject in my community that isn't being talked about. So when people are planning events and, scrolling through Instagram, thinking about how can I set up this panel? Or, I want to do a social media day in my community and educate women on how they can really position their brand on social media. And I want to have some experts on that. It feels really easy to find a social media expert, but public relations, haven't really thought about it. But now there's this girl, me, talking about PR on social media on my channel to this event coordinator who's planning an event. And she thinks to herself, oh, that's an interesting addition to my event that I hadn't considered before. So when you start showing up consistently and actually talking, like speaking to the camera, you start to position yourself as that speaker, and people buy into it, because you believe in the subject matter that you're educating them on, and they can see you speaking to them on camera, and it's easy for them to picture you speaking at their next event. So whenever someone comes to me with speaking engagements on the top of their list, we kind of go back to their social media channel first and say, okay, so where have you positioned yourself as a speaker on this? And we kind of go from there. Sometimes it's starting from ground zero. Sometimes there is an existing base of video of them speaking to themselves, but it's actually really refining down what their messaging is, because you need to position yourself speaking on one specific topic consistently to really start resonating with those people that are planning events in all these different spaces.
I see. So Erica, before you ask your question, so what was the topic that no one was talking about that you started talking about? What was
Public
it?
relations for personal brands.
Oh, okay. Kind of meta. Okay.
Yeah, it is
And
meta.
Erica, you go ahead. You have
Oh
some
yeah, I
questions.
was going to ask, how do you decide on your specific message?
Yeah. So there's a bit of a
Mhm.
framework that I work with clients on, and it goes back down to, okay, who are your competitors or your peers in the space? So when I look at the other PR experts, what are they talking about? How are they talking about it? And what aren't they talking about? That right there is an opportunity to grab that empty space and start filling it with your own thoughts or opinions. If you feel like everything is being talked about, which I hear a lot, we as personal brands or service providers, we all have a different opinion on how some of these processes are being run or things that are happening in our industry. So it's picking one point that you feel very strongly about and really articulating it in a way that appeals to your ideal client. So at the end of the day, I don't try to speak to everybody. My service offering and my style resonates a lot with a lot of women, a lot of younger women that have a brand or a business that they're excited about and feel empowered to invest in their brand and their business and their growth. So I know that that's the woman that I'm speaking to, and I curate my content to speak to her very specifically. We get a bit nervous when we feel like we only have to talk to one person because we think we're missing out on this really big audience, which we think is a bigger opportunity. But, really drill it down. Talk to that one specific person that you're trying to reach, because they exist in many forms, and tell them how your work or your mission helps them. What problem do you solve for them? And then you start to build your brand off of solving that unique problem for that unique person.
Right. So, since we're talking about personal branding, what if someone's interests are like super niche, like maybe like technical, like a technical topic that
Yeah.
may or may not necessarily have a lot of audience, even though they feel passionate about it? So, how would you advise that person?
I always say like the more niche, the better, because there is an audience for that. If you have a very technical offering and you're trying to sell a very technical service, let's use the example just because it's kind of recent in my world as someone who's an expert in technical SEO. So there's content SEO for websites, local SEO, but the technical SEO is something I don't quite understand, but I know that I need it. So I would encourage that person who has a very technical background or technical service offering to develop language or a way to talk about their service where they can communicate how they solve a problem for somebody. So at the end of the day, it's not so much about, okay, this is me and this is what I do. It's how do you help other people and what problem do you solve? So getting really good at talking about that is what's going to draw people in. Yes, sometimes you have to distill it down into more simplified language. I think a lot of business owners could benefit from this because we get tied up in our own jargon a lot of the time. Even I work with content coaches on making some of my language a little less clinical and a little more like use the words that your clients use when they're describing their problem to you. That's going to give you a lot of insight into the language you need to use to sell to them.
You talked about, well, if you go on social media, project authority, talk
Mhm.
about your niche offerings and how you're different from others, you
Yeah.
will receive inbound
Yeah.
leads or people offering you opportunities to speak on the stage. And what
Yeah.
I'm asking you is, like, what happens in scenarios where that doesn't happen and you want to be more proactive and do reach out to event owners?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, if it's not happening, then there is a brand problem. So if people aren't inviting you to speak on stage or in interviews, I would invite that person to look at their messaging and their brand a little bit more closely and find maybe some of the gaps or maybe where things aren't being communicated as clearly as maybe they think they are. Kind of goes back to what we were just chatting about on the technical offering side of things. Sometimes we need to use different language to reach that ideal person. But apart from, being very let's say like detail oriented or engaged with your brand on a very detailed level, if you do want to be proactive and reach new audiences and reach out either to an event coordinator or even to a podcast, you still need to be able to speak to that very specific topic. So if I'm an event coordinator and I'm planning an event for 100 guests, I'm going to be quite discerning about who's going to step on stage and speak to my 100 guests that I just promoted to, welcomed into my community, and am now, offering other people up a position on stage to speak to them. So developing that very, very unique position and how you plan to educate that audience and the value that you're going to bring to that audience is very important to be able to articulate. I actually had someone pitch me a couple days ago on more of a sales front, but he didn't bother to make any sort of connection to my business to his. This was someone that actually followed me on Instagram, so I knew he had an amazing opportunity to actually maybe reference some of my previous content and really try to form a relationship before just like hard pitching. But he didn't. And I ignored the email because there was no connection. And I kind of thought to myself, why would this person act like I don't know who he is? Like we follow each other. So yeah, at the root of it, public relations is relationship building. We forget about that and we just try to, slide into people's DMs or their inbox and say, hey, here's like what you could do for me, when it should actually be the opposite. let's form the relationship and say, like, how could I best serve your audience? Or is there something that, they think they could benefit from learning that I could provide? So we get so transactional with it. It doesn't have to be this way.
Right. Okay, do you have anything, or should I get into my next juicy tangent?
Get into your tangents.
All right, so here's the next one. How do we get on TV?
Love it. Love getting people on TV. So this is a great question, but it depends on your market, first of all. But I always say your local news station is your biggest opportunity. And I actually had this experience with a client. Oh, man, I guess that was almost a year ago now, but they were a really small art exhibit. And they were a small art exhibit in a very remote community. So there were neighboring television stations that I thought could be an opportunity. But to be honest, in my publicist's soul, I didn't think that TV was like really going to be their greatest opportunity in the PR space. And I was wrong. I pitched to TV anyways. And I had found, instead of pitching on, okay, here's this art exhibit. These are all of the mediums that you'll see. These are the stories behind the visuals. I actually didn't talk about the art exhibit. I talked about this artist couple who had an amazing love story, had been together for a really long time, had broken up, had reconnected, and they're creating the art together. And I was like, hey, that's the story. That's what's going to reach people, inspire people, maybe touch their heart or their emotions. So I pitched TV on that story because I know we're always looking for the feel good. You turn on your local news and it's like very doom and gloom. So the local news is always looking for ways to highlight, people in their community that are doing good work or inspiring or just spreading a little bit of cheer. So it doesn't matter what kind of business or offering you have, focus on the good. What's going to inspire someone, or how could they relate to that story too? That was probably the most impactful TV experience I've ever had for one of my clients, because I actually didn't think it would ever happen. It just goes to show how, people want to be touched these days on an emotional level.
So when you're creating your feel-good story to pitch to TV stations, is that focused on you and something in your background that would make a good story, or is it something related maybe to one of your clients, or how do you pitch a feel-good story?
Yeah. So I would it depends on what the purpose is. So, there's always a goal for getting on TV. If I give another example, it's a local plumber that I work with. So we're working together on a strategy to get them on TV, and how we will position it is this plumber is going to be the seasonal expert for, what do you need to do for your plumbing in the spring, in the fall, in the winter, and start to offer up some sort of information or, educational component that you can then offer to that audience. Because think about all of the segments on your local news. There's community, there's like crime, but then there's also lifestyle. People want to talk about events. There's always cooking. There's always home improvements. So look at the greater picture of all of those news segments that are available to you and figure out where you fit best. So for this plumber, we're putting them in like the home seasonal category, and we're coming up with a list of all the different topics we could possibly pitch on. And you better believe that every month we're going to have a different topic that we can suggest to our local news station or their local news station on, okay, people need to know that they need to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that their plumbing didn't get totally annihilated during a harsh winter. So let's come on and talk about it. That serves a wider audience. It has mass appeal. So whenever I'm working with a client, we think about what has mass appeal? What could appeal to, the 60-year-old that's watching the news, to the 40-year-old, to the, younger person that might be catching the news while they're in a waiting room. What is mass appeal that can just educate or inspire? And how do you tailor that down into something that's easy to talk about. News is short, digestible clips, kind of go from there. So it's totally client specific, and it really depends on the goals of your PR campaign or your efforts. But yeah, so many opportunities. I love talking about TV.
Who do you reach out to? Like when you say local TV station,
Yeah.
do you have like a specific tactic that you use to avoid the gatekeepers?
Yep. So what you want to avoid, and you can submit like a press release or an overarching, statement to that like editor or news tips email that's usually associated with your news station. But journalists all have, and television hosts, whoever they are, they have their own individual email addresses too. So with a little FBI work online, you can usually track that down. So that's where I've seen success with my clients in the past. I use public relations software that gives you that information. Pay a lot of money for the information, but you have it available. But if it's not available to you, a lot of these hosts and journalists have Twitter or Instagram or some sort of social media platform too. So if you can't find that email address, I'm sure you can find another way to get in touch with them. And then it's sliding into their DMs, forming that connection, going back to that relational aspect, building up a bit of rapport. I love this tip. If you're pitching anyone a podcast, or, thinking back to the person who pitched me in my email a couple days ago, like, connect it back to that person. Maybe it's a piece of content that they've made. Maybe it's a previous article that they've written, or a previous episode, or a guest that they had that really inspired you. Show them that you've done the work to make sure that this topic that you're about to pitch them on is a good fit for what they cover. Like, don't go pitching a sports journalist on your home improvement story, because it's not going to land. So make sure you do the research to ensure that the contact is right, and then focus on that relational aspect. Let them know why you loved their last article and why this new one would be a great fit for them too. It's always bringing it back to them. And honestly, this person that had pitched me, if he would have told me, "Hey, Katrina, I've been following you online for, a few weeks, and I love your work, and I think we'd be a great fit for working together," I would have responded to that email. But he didn't personalize it. He didn't even say that he followed me on Instagram. I actually had to double check that it was the same person that was engaging with me on this other platform. So you want to keep it as personal as possible, because that's where your opportunity is, and forming the relationship.
Is pitching an art?
Yes.
Or a science?
It is an art. It is a lost art. I feel like we've lost it. We think everything is so transactional. We think we can just like send an email and ask and you shall receive. And it's so not the case. I don't think it's a science. It's not that technical. It goes down to like human nature, like forming relationships, the art of forming an authentic relationship. Like, yeah, I feel like we've lost touch with that, with this whole like digital age.
I was like thinking about the first message that I sent you. I
Yeah.
don't know if you remember.
Uh-huh.
I was gonna ask you if you want to critique that live.
No,
If I
I thought
share
it
the
was
screen.
great. I read it before we started recording, because I wanted to, make sure I had all my bases covered. And I
Erica, you
thought
want
it
to see
was
it?
so good.
Let's show it to everyone.
Okay.
I did use ChatGPT for help, to make sure my English and everything was proper. But
That's okay. You know what? It didn't scream ChatGPT to me, and I am like, I have eyes on AI at all times. You didn't use the word unlock or unleash, so that was like, that's usually a dead giveaway for me.
using the paid version.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Yeah,
So
honestly.
the reason I did the screen share was I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
like when we do outreaches to other guests and other content creators and asking them to come on our show, um, is like, what is the ideal length? How long a message should be? Like, I also know that it's dependent on where you're doing the outreach, right? So, for example, if you're on Instagram, I'm guessing it needs to be shorter than if you're writing an email. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. It definitely varies depending on the platform, but I would always say like between 2 to 3 paragraphs probably feels good. And like short paragraphs, I would say like a DM inbox paragraph is a good length. In that introductory paragraph, you want to make it clear what you're asking them right away. So it's like, hey, Katrina, took a look at your profile. I think you'd be a great fit for my podcast. And then use that second paragraph to explain the why. Because when I get a message, I want to know right away, like, okay, what is this? If you bury the lead, if you put the invitation at the very bottom, I'm not really sure what this is. If it's too long, I might not read to the end. And now I've missed an opportunity and you've missed an opportunity. So, best practices, first paragraph, stick that lead or that request right in. Use the second paragraph to really explain why you think that person's a good fit for your show or what you liked about their content or, the feel good stuff. And then you can use that third paragraph for either like a little bit more information about your show or even a little bit more like zhuzhing, making them feel good. And then quick sign off. Doesn't have to be long because honestly, in that kind of first introduction, people are going to know pretty quickly whether or not it's a fit. For me, I was like, oh, this person has read my website. So yeah, I feel like you had taken the time to look into my story, my background, look at more of my online presence as opposed to just one profile and really get a sense for me and my business. So I think that's really important. When someone is pitching to a podcast, I actually always say, listen to a couple episodes. Make sure that you actually feel like it's an energetic fit. I've had clients go on podcasts where they did not like feel like it was the warm and fuzzy that they were expecting. And I was like, well, did you listen to an episode? Like I can only do so much. There's some homework that a client has to do too, to be able to assess like, yeah, this feels right. This feels like a good environment for me to speak about my purpose or my mission. Yeah. So there's definitely an art to the pitch. Doesn't matter what side you're on. But there's always research involved, whether you're the one doing the pitching and the outreach to become a guest or whether you're looking for guests. It's always good to just like do a little bit of background check because you never know. Something else might come up too. And you're like, actually, I've now decided this person's not right.
What are your thoughts on follow-up? Like if you really want that guest and they don't respond, would you follow up? And if yes, how many times?
Yes. Always follow up at least once. In the PR world, best practices, you could probably follow up twice and then that is it. Like, please do not do any more outreach. I have heard really bad advice on another podcast a couple of days ago where someone said that they suggest following up 5 times. Don't follow up 5 times. Just like, one follow-up is good. And I've seen a lot of success on that follow-up. So I can think of one situation quite recently where I just knew that I had a client that was absolutely perfect for a podcast. I did not hear anything. So in my follow-up, which was about a week later, I usually say like 7 to 14 days for that first follow-up. In that follow-up, I listened to a completely different episode, like one of the newer podcast episodes that had come up. And in my follow-up, I referenced the new episode just to show that I was keeping up with the show. It wasn't just me saying, hey, just bringing this back to the top of your inbox. No, I basically crafted an entirely new pitch to help this host see my guest in maybe a different light or a different, present a different angle. And to be honest, when that podcast responded to me, like about an hour later, which was fast, he said to me, Katrina, I am so sorry. I do not know how I missed your first email, but thank you so much for following up. And I would say like, 75% of opportunities I secure for my clients are on the follow-up. So don't feel like you're being annoying, which is what people automatically think. People are busy. Emails get buried. I call my inbox the Wild West because I never know what's going on there on any given day. And things can get lost if, you're not being proactive. So definitely follow up once. If this is someone that you just think would be so great, follow up again, but maybe put a little bit more time between that follow up and then your next one. Maybe give it a few weeks just in case they're going through like something personal. Maybe there's something in their life that's preventing them from even like keeping up to date on their emails or responding, or they're just not in the right place. So don't discount the follow up, but treat it with respect and with process. But yeah, I always say follow up at least once. Otherwise, you might be leaving something on the table.
So here's a discussion Erica and I were having, and
Yeah.
obviously it's like half joking, but we really want to invite Seth Godin on this show,
Yeah.
and I was telling Erica, we should write an outreach email, maybe do like a Loom video. We'll actually have a question for a Loom video right
Yeah.
after this, but I was saying, well, maybe we should do a Loom video for Seth. And Erica was like, well, he's super busy. He's not going to respond to us. And then my response was like, what if we set up a recurring calendar event and and send him like one email every month until he says yes. And Erica was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I was like, but it'll be a fun experiment. He has to say yes if we ask him nicely and make it relevant. Just like you were saying, refer like a
Yeah.
recent podcast he has been
Yeah.
on, refer to his recent book or something. And Erica was like, no, that sounds creepy. You don't want to send him every month, once a month, forever.
Yeah. I'd probably like not do once a month, but if this is someone you're dedicated to, maybe once a quarter would be okay. A couple times a year just to see. Yeah, I don't want to deter you, but yeah, once a month would be a bit heavy, I think. You don't want to like annoy them to the point where they're like, absolutely not.
I was like,
That's a
well,
little stalkerish. No, once a month.
well, fine. We'll do once a quarter. And if he gets mad, we're like, well, we have video proof. Katrina told us once a
Once a
quarter
quarter
is
is
fine.
fine.
Once a
Once
quarter
a
is
quarter.
fine. So,
Let me know how it goes. Okay,
so
tell
the
me about
part.
the Loom video.
Oh yeah. We were actually doing Loom videos for
Mhm.
outreaches. The problem I think we ran into is the Loom video links. It looks spammy. It's
Yeah.
like a large link, and some people don't know what Loom is, and it has like a lot of random characters built into it.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
looks spammy to me. So we started doing Loom videos, and with Loom videos, you can actually see if someone saw the video or not.
Yeah.
So a lot of our Loom videos were going unseen. At first, we thought, oh, maybe they're not actually getting delivered to their inboxes. But then actually we realized, because it also, if you try to send it to yourself, it always gets delivered. So we hypothesize that it's probably
Yeah.
because people are thinking that it's spam.
Yeah, I don't think I would open a random Loom.
Oh, you
Never.
won't?
No.
Yeah. So we stopped doing
Yeah.
Loom, and we reverted back to sending email. So what are your thoughts on sending Loom videos?
Yeah, I get a couple of them from a sales side of things. There's a lot of companies that are doing that. I actually see quite a few of them land in my junk email. I did click on one once, the very first one I got, because I thought it was an interesting tactic. But I'm familiar with Loom, so I might not be the best test audience here. But as soon as I opened and watched part of it, I thought to myself, damn it, he's going to know that I watched this and I'm so not interested in what he's selling. But I thought it was an interesting tactic. What you could do if you ever do outreach via Instagram, voice notes are a very powerful tool. So, there's an art, as there's to everything. But if someone sends you a voice note, you're going to listen to the voice note because you want to know what the heck it says. but keep it short. So if you find someone on Instagram and you're like, okay, like I want to pitch them, but you know what? I'm going to do things a bit differently. Doesn't look spammy because it's Instagram. So, I mean, yeah, there's spam on Instagram, but if it's coming from an account that looks, reputable and not fake, then people are going to listen because they're curious, because there's no transcription, there's no way around it. So you'll at least know that because it'll say seen. So you'll know if they've seen it, they for sure listened to it, because who could resist? So there's something you could try. I would keep it short and sweet and concise. Try not to go on for too long. 30 seconds is probably enough. And get your request in there in the first couple seconds. So they know, if I got a podcast invite via DM voice note, and in the first 10 seconds, this person was saying hey, I'm really excited to invite you onto my podcast, I'd keep listening to that. So maybe try that, because that's been a powerful tool in the past with some of my clients.
What if they don't have Instagram, and the only way you can reach out to them is via email? Can you still use the voice note strategy?
You can't. Email pitching is really the foundation of most PR these days. Unfortunately, if someone's just not going to respond, they're not going to respond. I've tried all the fancy workarounds. There are some just suggestions, make sure that you don't have any attachments in the email. So links are generally fine, but don't attach images or anything that is going to increase your chances of landing in the spam folder. Testing subject lines are really important too. So in your follow-up, changing up the subject line, don't just let it say whatever your subject line was the last time. Try and get a bit more creative. There's a lot of A/B testing you can do with subject lines that can be beneficial. So yeah, if you're not getting a response via email, there's no fancy workaround, but sometimes it's just finessing some of these things to see if you can get a response.
What about subject lines? For these outreaches, we usually just say hi and the first name of the person in the subject line.
Yeah.
What do you think of that subject line, and how can we improve it?
Yeah. Subject lines are such an interesting topic for discussion, because it really just depends on what is the content, what does that journalist there's so many variables. But I always say experiment with a couple different things. I would probably suggest for you doing outreach to guests is stick something related to want to speak about X on my podcast. I would put more context in that subject line, because I actually think that's going to get more opens, and that's going to entice someone to see a podcast invite in the subject line. I'm going to click that email. I think a lot of people are going to click that email. So I would invite you to probably experiment with a couple different ways that you can kind of appeal to people in that very, very valuable moment where they're like, am I going to open this, or am I just going to trash it? So kind of get in front of them a bit quicker. I would try that and see how it goes. Yeah.
Because my thought process was if you use their name in the subject line, who's not gonna open? If I say hi, Erica, and even if it's a spammy email, you're still gonna be wait, that person knows my name. And they said,
I don't know. I actually think, now that I think about it, I'd be a little suspicious of an email that just says, hi, Erica.
In the subject line.
Yeah. Yeah, because if it's from someone I don't know and they're just saying, hi, Erica, that screams spam to me.
You're not going to open it?
Yeah.
You're not going to open it?
I don't know.
Because maybe. I feel like if you get an email saying, podcast invitation, you're like, oh, actually, no, not really. It's just a spammy podcast. I get so many. Really?
I don't know. I think with a podcast, it may be a little bit different from other use cases, because you're giving people an opportunity to share their story with your audience. So there's sort of some value in that. You're not trying to sell them something, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Oh, you're not selling. Yeah. No, that's a good point. So you're asking them to share what they have to say. You're not really selling anything.
Yeah. I do so much experimentation with subject lines. There's lots of different software you can use. There's one called CoSchedule that has like a subject line analyzer built in. So sometimes I'll just, type it in and see what kind of optimizations it suggests. Really, it's all just that's one that you got to play with, because I don't think there's anything perfect. I mean, if I was to go to my spam folder right now in my inbox, I know there's some creative subject lines in there. I've seen them. And I'm like, you almost got me.
Oh, you said in the spam folder. You didn't open them.
Yes.
Interesting.
I see them. There's actually one I can think of that does a really good job. Like, I almost opened, like, now I know better, but their subject lines are, I don't want to put them on blast, but they're top of mind right now because they're quite proficient on the subject line testing. So I would just say, like, nothing, try anything, because that's the fastest way you're going to get someone to open that. So I would just, see what works, but you can get creative there for sure.
Remind me again. So you said use the podcast invitation in the subject line, but then also make it more contextual. Can you remind me what you said?
Yeah. So one thing I would try if I were you is, because, if you can add some context that you've actually like researched them into the subject line. So let's use me as an example. If you sent me an email, if you had said, "Hey, Katrina, want to talk PR on my podcast?" I'd be like, okay, that seems very personalized. Like, that's someone that has clearly done a bit of research. You don't want to make the subject line too long. So keeping it like, quite concise to like a shorter topic, not a whole like tangent runaround. But I think, okay, this is someone actually inviting me to talk about PR on their podcast. That's pretty cool. I would try that. I'd open that email.
I see. No, but you did mention "Hey Katrina," as in like you are putting the name.
Yeah, I think I've done that before with some of my clients. I think there's benefit. You can do it either way. Like, maybe you're not, but I think in that particular context, since you are, the second part of that is asking if they want to
Right.
talk about a personal topic, then you might as well put two and two together.
I see. Oh yeah. So I'm like, I was halfway there.
You're halfway there.
Halfway. Yeah.
Hashtag winning. So Erica, would you click on it? Like if someone said, "Hey Erica,
that would be,
wanna talk land investing on my podcast?" All right.
that doesn't seem creepy.
Okay.
Just "Hey Erica" does.
Well, so here's the question. So in the next quarter, when I send my second email to Seth Godin, what would be my subject line then?
Let's try this one. "Hey Seth."
No, this is the first one, right?
Oh, okay.
Because we're trying different angles every quarter, right?
Yes. Well, you should try this one that we've just talked about. I feel like that is going to be the best experiment.
No. What I'm saying is, like, I did, let's say I did send him, right? This subject line, and I explained the 3 paras, and now I didn't get a response.
Okay.
And now I waited 3 months, and I'm composing a brand new email. Obviously, I'm not going to reuse the same subject line.
No, don't do that.
So I'm asking, what would be my second? Like, would you be like totally different, or would you still have podcast mentioned in the subject line? What are your thoughts?
I would take a bit of a different approach. I would probably look at some of his more recent content and see if you can get that to like play in. So, maybe he just went on like an amazing vacation. Maybe you reference that in the subject line, like, "Hey, now that you're back from vacation, do you have time for a podcast?"
Well, the joke's on us that Godin doesn't take vacations.
Unless he doesn't have to fly, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Or I don't know. Like, there's so many. I like getting going down the personal route. So I would maybe see, try to align it with his interests for sure.
Right.
I'm interested to know how this saga continues.
But you still mentioned the podcast in the second
I think
email,
it's
right?
No,
important
in
here.
the body, yes, but not in
No,
the.
she said when you're
Yeah.
back, now that you're back from your vacation, want to go on a
Oh,
podcast.
is that what you said?
Yeah.
You
Yes,
did
I
that?
did. Yeah. I think
That's
that's, like,
funny.
really important. So just for context, if I'm pitching for a client to get on a podcast, this is just for, like, audience information. I'm not saying, "Hey, I wanna be on your podcast," in the subject line. I'm gonna figure out, like, actually, you know what I've used in the past, just to be on the flip side for a moment, which has been successful? Sometimes I like to say, "Here's something you haven't talked about on your podcast yet." And
Oh,
then
that's good.
yeah,
That's good.
that's a good one.
Well, actually, someone did actually send me that
Yeah,
exact
yeah.
thing.
I think I remember
No, no,
seeing
no.
him.
There's actually you don't know about this because it just happened
Oh,
yesterday.
okay.
Someone sent me an email
Uh-huh.
saying, I checked out your podcast and I noticed that none of your guests have talked about breath work. And it's a really interesting topic. And here are some of the links. You should take a look.
That
Mm.
It's a trend.
that person hired a PR firm then,
They
right?
probably hired
Ah.
you.
Yeah,
Are
that
you
sounds
training
like
people?
it's very specific advice I've given in the past. I'm sure it's not a new secret, but yeah, for me, that's like the number one way. Like, you wanna get on a podcast, a very specific podcast, go through their episodes, find the opportunity, and then tell them. Like, tell them, "Hey, this is what you're missing, and here I am." So,
So
yeah, I love that.
here's a secret that I'll share with you, and obviously
Hey,
with all the audience.
yeah.
There's one technique that
Mm,
this PR firm is using, or like multiple PR firms are using,
yeah.
and every time they have used this technique, I was forced to say yes to them, even though I didn't want to. You
Wow. Okay, tell me.
So here it is, right? So
Yeah.
they'll send you an email, and pitching a guest. They'll be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this person, I checked out your podcast, very good fit. Please take a look at their profile, and if it works, please reach out to me." And then they'll say, "P.S. I just left you a 5-star review on
Ah.
Apple Podcast."
Yeah, that's good. I didn't know that success rate was so high, but I
What
you
am I
know
supposed to do here? I have to respond. I have to at least look at the profile. I cannot say let's ignore someone with like not only a personalized message, but with also the fact that they did something for me proactively.
Mhm.
Although
That's
maybe other podcast hosts are more heartless than you are.
I don't know if someone can be that heartless. I mean,
there
it's so
are
hard to. It's very hard to get reviews, right? And someone leaves a 5-star review just force you to look at a profile and make a yes or no decision and respond to them. I think I feel like indebted to their kindness. So I think,
yeah.
what
I
are your
I
thoughts?
actually well, I do see this on the flip side where there are podcasts that suggest, "Hey, we do prioritize people that have left us a five-star review." I have seen it, many times, and
Oh,
No.
maybe that's how they got it.
Oh,
I see.
yeah.
yeah, and, it I guess I'm okay with that because I have done it. Not for myself personally, but for clients, I've said, like, "You really wanna get on this?" Yeah, we'll do the five-star review and send along the screenshot. But I don't know, there's a part of me that doesn't feel right about it. It's kind of
Like, ethically, yeah.
yeah. Like, hey, if I'm someone looking to listen to a podcast and I'm looking at the reviews, I wanna know that, like, these are real reviews before I waste my time on the podcast.
Isn't it like the same technique they use, like whatever, like the Krishna people, they at the airports they'll give
Oh,
you
and they
like a
give you a little
flower,
gift or something.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
and then
then ask for a
yeah.
donation, and now
Yeah.
you're obligated to,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I've seen that.
It's the same strategy. So that's like
Totally.
the trick of the trades. Are there any other tricks like that that PR firms use to, like, if a podcast that they really want their clients to get on, and kind of like
Mhm.
put the odds in your favor kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I always say like gifts don't hurt, especially if you're a product-based business or if the founder of a product-based business, like sending along a PR package of your product in advance is a great way to kind of get eyes on the product. Follow it up with an email once it's been delivered and say, I sent along my new hand creams. Did you love them? I would love to tell you the story behind them. I see that, that's not a new tactic. A lot of these brands are doing that these days. PR packages have really like taken off on a whole nother level. So that's something that's, not out of the question. Other tricks. The gifting's a good one. The subject lines, the reviews. There's something to be said about just like engaging with their content on social media, be it like getting eyes on your profile. If I'm trying to get a client on a very specific podcast, you better believe that we're going to follow that host, follow their channel. We're going to comment on their posts. We're going to send them DMs, responding to their content. Like we're just trying to get eyes on us from that very specific person. So just putting yourself in front of them in as many ways as you can't hurt.
So should we send a gift to Seth Godin if he doesn't
Yeah.
respond after 4 quarter worth of emails?
Yes. Or even send him if he's talked about something that he needs or, has referenced something, send it to him.
Oh yeah, doesn't he like send these emails saying, "Oh, my friend just launched this handmade soap or whatever company."
Yes.
So you just buy that soap and send it to him as a gift. I tried the vanilla flavor. I'm sure you're gonna like the pumpkin flavor even more. Please come to our podcast.
Just
How
try
can you say no
everything.
then?
Just try everything and
need
see
his
how it
address
goes.
though to do that.
I'm sure we can find it. We know he lives in upstate New York. We'll narrow it down. Erica, do you have any other questions, or should I move on to? I have one more.
I did just have one question on the getting on podcast front. So, if you want to be a guest on a podcast, and do you need to have like a similar social media following, or is it more just about really pitching your message as something that person's audience would engage with?
Yeah, the first one is important. So having a similar following in comparison to the host in the show, that's going to be one of the first things that host or their producer, whoever is doing the bookings, is going to be one of the first things that they look for. So I always say to my clients, like, be realistic in your pitching. If you have 500 followers on Instagram, you can get on podcasts. They're just not going to be the podcasts that maybe have 10,000 followers or like 20,000 listeners one day, but you got to start small and, build up to that and build your own following and, build your own brand presence to be able to kind of match that opportunity. Not to say that it's entirely out of the question. If you can offer something really, really unique and that your message is in alignment with that audience and you can grab the attention, it's not always based on following. Sometimes it is more fit. Like I have had clients that have a smaller following and have gotten on a bigger show, but that's because I was able to really articulate why that guest would be an asset to that show. One example comes to mind. It was actually a podcast that I was listening to in the marketing space, and I had just happened to listen to an episode where the host actually said, I'm looking for speakers or guests on these very specific topics. And I was like, oh, I have a client that can speak on that specific topic. And so I emailed right away because timing is of the essence in those particular situations. I'm like, hey, I listened to your show. I heard you're looking for this kind of guest. And in that particular instance, this guest had a smaller following in comparison to the show, but the host welcomed her on with open arms because she was going to speak to exactly what that host was looking for. So really getting familiar with the show and keeping your eyes and ears open for opportunities are, great ways to take advantage of them when they do come up.
In general, a public relation firm, like not just yours, I'm talking in general, what percentage of outreaches are like cold, where you're just using your skills, your skills of a better subject line, or writing better emails? So what percentage of the outreaches you just using your skills, as opposed to the percentage of outreaches that are you doing that are based on existing networking connections that are pre-existing?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to ask, like, is it like a 80-20, where 80% of outreaches are done like cold outreaches, just because all the available podcasts that a person could go to?
Mm-hmm.
And then 20% is, oh, I know this person there, so I will be able to get you in, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the firm and then what they're specializing in. Podcasting in particular is so interesting because there are so many cross industries, across the world. So there are so many different opportunities. I find it hard to believe that any particular firm would be able to say that, oh, I know like all of the podcasts or the majority of the podcasts in this particular space. They probably don't. So I think in podcasting in particular, most of that is cold outreach. I can think in my particular practice, I know a lot of people that have podcasts, but not all of my clients are good fits for those podcasts. I can make the connection if it is a fit, but that's not always going to be the case. In traditional media, I would say it is more heavily based on like who that firm knows and has relationships with. For example, I live in Vancouver, Canada. I have strong connections to my local news media here. And while I do have some like one-off connections with news media in, other states and other cities, it's easiest for me to garner local news coverage in my own backyard because I have those existing relationships. And if I don't, I probably know someone that can introduce me. So that on the traditional news front, tends to be more important or more prevalent. But that's what I think is so cool about this new, like, I guess it's not new, but the digital age where there seems to be so many PR opportunities, it's actually not so much about who you know anymore. Like you can meet those people and form relationships with the journalists or contacts that you will hope will write about you or cover your story one day. Like anyone can make those connections. So I think that's what's really cool. And that's kind of why I had started some of my more small business programs, because I was like, anyone can learn how to do this. It's an art. Anyone can learn how to pitch themselves and find the contact information that they need to pitch themselves. So yeah, to answer your question, I guess it just depends on the firm, and it depends on the goals and what kind of media that client is really wanting to engage with.
Right. So but the majority, you would safely guess that it is cold outreach, correct?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
especially now too, like you see so much turnover in different outlets. So like, there's constantly layoffs in the news media. People are constantly moving jobs and moving to different outlets. So it is much more challenging to keep up with those people and who's where. So I have to believe that it's a lot of cold outreach these days.
Right. Also, a question about press releases. Are they
Mhm.
of any use these days, for at least for like small businesses and personal branding purposes?
Yeah, there's a hot debate on press releases on LinkedIn. I actually just saw one post about it yesterday. People live in two different camps. I will use a press release. Here's a good example. One of my clients is a not-for-profit, kind of in the sports industry. So they will respond to policy changes on the government level that kind of affect sport in some of these areas that they advocate in. So what we will do whenever the government has made a change to a policy that affects them or their initiatives, we'll put together a statement. I will put together a press release that includes that statement, and we send it out to the media. And then the media, because we've positioned this organization as kind of a thought leader or authority on this very particular subject matter, now that shows the media, oh, okay, this organization has just put out their statement. That's a great reminder that I can talk to them and have them on, my news segment later to speak more at length. So sometimes sending out a mass press release isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can remind people that you are the expert or the authority on a topic. If you are doing a new product launch or a new business launch, I don't think it's a bad thing to do either, just to build up some familiarity. But I really believe that most of your media coverage, especially if you're using PR on an ongoing basis, it really is just more consistent personal outreach efforts as opposed to sending out like a mass press release or just like deferring to the press release for information. I think it's much easier to gain coverage when you're sending a personalized pitch, and maybe you link to the press release for more information. I'll do that sometimes too. But I don't do a lot of just sending out releases these days. Doesn't gain the results that it used to even like 10 years ago.
Right. I mean, no one, like, who is the recipient? Like, is anyone reading it?
It's a good question. Yeah, that's what I would ask my client that wants to do a press release. Like, is anyone going to read this thing? Yeah, I'll write them. Sometimes it's just for more information. So it's, doing that personalized pitch and linking to the release so someone can get all of the like, okay, here's the dates, the location, if it's an event, the dates, the location, what it is, who's speaking, and bing bang, got all the information I need. I've seen that work, but I use them strategically because they don't really work for like every announcement or every launch. Not everyone's going to read those for sure.
Right.
You're talking about how it's really important to have these personal pitches to, let's say we're going back to traditional news media, maybe trying to get on TV. Yeah. And the goal is to show that you have a story that has mass appeal.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're a small business owner that has something very niche?
You don't go on TV.
Well,
like you make parts for lawnmowers, something like that.
Yeah, parts for a lawnmower. I'd have to think about that one more in depth. I guess it depends. Like, okay, who is he trying to sell to? Is the general consumer buying parts for the lawnmower? Maybe not. Maybe his audience is more B2B. In that case, he's probably going to need to do some PR within his industry. Are there industry publications that focus on like lawnmower building? Like, who is he really trying to sell to? That would be the first question, because if it isn't a general consumer, then TV probably isn't the answer. Unless there was like this amazing, I don't know, maybe he went on Shark Tank or something to that. And he's just like a local businessman who, got an amazing deal. Like there's a story, but, now we're not talking about the parts. We're talking about his experience. The lawnmower parts are now like kind of supplementary to the story. So, there's layers to each and every story and each and every person that wants to get on TV. You just got to find the angle.
I'm curious. So I have a company that buys and sells vacant land.
Yeah.
You're saying, so TV may not be for every business, right? Mm-hmm. Depends on who your customer is. Mm-hmm. What would be the best outlet for a company like that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you want to get on TV, so I'm going to give you a suggestion. So think about we're in our locale, there's vacant land, buying and selling. Maybe there was a really interesting transaction that happens. Like, is there a piece of land that used to be used for something or has like a very interesting story behind it? Or are you now positioned as like, I'm the land expert? I can tell you how much your land is worth. I can tell you like why it's worth this much, or, if I have some land, but I'm not really sure that it's like, should I sell it? Should I wait? Maybe you're positioning yourself as the expert on land development or land sales. So it's kind of finessing your personal brand to now be the authority on that space. And then you would probably pitch yourself on a couple different angles with your local news media over time to see like, okay, what's working, what's not, but they're always looking for stories. So what I would probably encourage you to do is think about some of the angles that you could take with your business. So, is there an element that the general consumer is interested in land sales because, hey, I live in an area where there's a lot of people that own land and they're just holding on to it. Maybe they shouldn't be just holding on to it. Maybe there's opportunity there for them to sell it now, but you got to tell them why. So think about those kind of interesting nuggets that someone like might have their interest piqued by. And I would pitch on those, but you're probably going to want to have a couple different ones in your arsenal that you can pull out at different times. Pitch, follow up, didn't work. Okay, a couple months later, we're going to try a different topic. Pitch, follow up, and then just forming connections. Find the contacts that have maybe covered land development or real estate before. Those are hot topics on like all news channels. It doesn't matter what community you live in. So figure out who those journalists are and start to form a relationship with them. Maybe it's on Twitter or Instagram. Start to get to know who they are. And then maybe based on that relationship that you now have, you can say, hey, I had this idea. I would love to share this really insightful topic on land sales on like the 6 o'clock news because I think it's prevalent to this particular audience. Now that you have that interesting connection, I think they'd be more receptive. A lot of my TV appearances, one that I've had in the past, was because I knew the journalist. And I was able to say, hey, can you do me a favor? So I would encourage you to form those relationships too, because they will be beneficial in the future. And like, there are dead news days where it's like, we just need a story. Let's do something like lifestyle human interest. And I think land sales would probably pop up as a good opportunity in those particular instances. That would come down to your timing. Like maybe you pitched on a day when, hey, actually, yeah, we need to fill some time. Come on over. So yeah, I believe it. I'm excited.
Pitch with quarterly follow-ups, Erica. And if that doesn't work, just send them gifts.
Use the Seth Godin strategy.
Yeah, we already know the Seth Godin strategy.
Send them chocolate.
Here's a silly question. I'm also trying to figure out in my head how to ask without offending you in any way.
Okay.
See, you have such a fun, energetic personality. So I'm curious to know how much of it is natural and how much of it is something that you had to proactively work on.
That doesn't offend me. That's a really good question. I call myself an introverted extrovert. So like this is very natural to me, but once it's over, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, like I'm ready to just like no one talk to me for the rest of the day. Actually, I've had a couple different like calls today that have all been like really high energy, really engaging. I have an Instagram live that I'm doing in a little bit, and I'm like, how did all of these things happen on one day? Like, by the time that Instagram live is over, I'm going to say like no more phone, no more internet until like, next week, because it is for me, not draining, but I'm the kind of person that needs to recharge after I've just like energetically outputted all day.
That was an interesting question on the topic of introverts.
Wait, you didn't answer though. What percentage? What percentage is natural, and what percentage is you actively worked on it?
I would say 80% natural. This is my personality, but there's like a 20% that's like, okay, Katrina, bring the energy today. Like, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Erica, what were you saying?
Well, yeah, because now that I'm thinking about it, if you're an introvert and you're more sort of the traditional introverts, you're a little more quiet, you don't have a ton of energy, but you do want to be the forward-facing person of your company. Is there an opportunity for that, or do you need to train yourself to pretend that you're a little more?
Or hire someone, right?
Yeah.
To
someone else.
Yeah. You know what? Hiring someone is always a great way to have that additional support. But honestly, I can't remember who said this, but at some point in this week, someone told me that like introverts are all the rage right now. Like it's trendy to be introverted. And I actually agreed with that because there seems to be this like kind of movement where people don't have so much public facing energy on social media. And I think, if you want to build a personal brand, yes, you have to integrate the personal into that. I don't think it has to be all the time, every day. Sometimes I actually think like quality over quantity. So if you can show up really authoritatively with a very interesting, point or messaging, and then, you don't do it every day, maybe you're just showing up once a week because that's your capacity. I think that's still very impactful, especially in a place like LinkedIn. That's a place where I think introverts can actually thrive and build a personal brand that doesn't feel so like energetically draining, for lack of a better word. Instagram feels like this place where it's heavy on video, heavy on aesthetic and sharing, and people talking about this and that, and they're dancing and they're doing all these things. On LinkedIn, you actually have such an opportunity to just write, be very concise with your thoughts. You don't even have to do video. I have clients that just write very, very compelling LinkedIn posts and have gained a following that way. So yeah, I think it depends on the medium, but I do think there's opportunities for like every level of energy.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think we went over. So
yeah, we have gone past time.
Why don't you ask the final question?
Okay. So this was a great talk. I think we now have our Seth Godin strategy. So we'll have to check back in a year and see if we connected with him. But in the meantime, if anyone wants to learn more.
If he does respond, we can give credit to Katrina, right?
Yes! You have to tell me if he responds. This is going to keep me up at night.
I'm going to use that for my intro now.
That's what you've been looking for this whole time.
Yeah. Love it.
But if anyone wants to reach out to you, learn more about PR, maybe hire you, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, my consultancy is called Knockout Directive. I'm Knockout Directive on Instagram. I'm super active over there. Katrina Owens on LinkedIn, and my website is knockoutdirective.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys too.